The Seeds of Death features the return of one of the better known Doctor Who foes amongst classic fans, the Ice Warriors. It's hard to say for certain which story is better, but I do think I slightly prefer this one to the Ice Warriors. This actually feels very much like a classic base under siege story in Troughton's era as the Doctor. Probably the biggest fault of the Seeds of Death is that it takes a little bit to get going. The first 2 episodes were fine, but I didn't feel they brought much of interest to the table. It was about a third of the way through into the first part before the TARDIS team even showed up, which was a welcome relief because it had been boring up until that point. So the first 2 episodes, they were fine, they were good enough even, but episode 3 was when I started to enjoy the story notably more. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what changed that made me enjoy this one more after the third part, but something must have, because I just got way more wrapped up in the events of what was going on, in what the Ice Warriors were doing, and in what our main characters were doing. So basically this story is set in the future where our TARDIS team lands on a space station and the story picks up there. The Ice Warriors actually show up right around when our protagonists do. In fact, it might have even been before they do, and the Ice Warriors work about as well as they did last time. I find that they're actually more effective the less that they talk and the less that they appear. Obviously, they need to be in the actual story, but when they're in it too much, they don't work for me. But I found that in the last 4 episodes, they were able to find a much better balance. So their costumes don't completely sell the creatures, but I am able to roll with them. They're serviceable, they just don't happen to do much for me. I'm not really sure why the Ice Warriors are one of the most popular classic series monsters, because I haven't really seen them do anything to make them stand out all that much. Maybe it's just because they've appeared more than once, I don't really know why. But yeah, they work fine in this one, they're pretty serviceable and effective as foes to our main characters. I found that the actual Seeds of Death worked pretty well in this. They're simple but effective. They're just these balls, and once you figure out what the purpose of them is, it works, and it makes sense based on what we know about the Ice Warriors and their past. There are some guest actors and characters in this, and some of them do pretty well. It's actually the older actors who are more convincing, which I suppose makes sense, but the younger ones aren't as good. Mainly this one character who's actually semi-important to the story. If you've seen much television before, then you've seen this exact character in many things before, used in exactly the same way, except performed better. And if you've seen this story, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. He's this guy who is kind of panicking, freaking out, and plays a very important role in what does happen, and if you've seen it, you know what that role is, and if you've also seen other, television movies, you've seen characters do similar things, but for me, this actor just really was not able to sell it. Our main cast is fun as always. Some of the best parts of this story are when they're all together. They work quite well as a trio, especially the back and forth quips of the Doctor and Jamie, although we do get further proof that Jamie can be a tad sexist.
Now which way?
I don't know, I'm lost.
I thought you knew the way.
So did I. Let's try this way.
Women.
And that's a bit of a shame to see this reoccur, but it's not an isolated incident. It's something seen before from Jamie, and it might show up again. It does kind of make sense considering the time period that this character is from, but it's a shame nonetheless, because otherwise he is actually a good character. Zoe is one that has never quite clicked with me, because I feel that she's relatively inconsistent. Sometimes she'll be smart and capable, and at other times she'll be foolish and helpless. There's something with her that has just never fully worked for me, and from what I can tell, that's it. She's not consistent. And when I bring up her acting foolishly and being helpless, I don't mean that she's a vulnerable character, because there's a big difference between being stupid and being vulnerable. So I just want to be clear about what I mean in terms of this not just being a character who is a bit vulnerable, but rather being a character who just acts foolishly. So yeah, this one started off being a little bit less interesting.
You are wasting time.
But picked up after the first third, basically when our main cast switches locations. And if you've seen it, then you'll know what that switch kind of means and how that really plays into the story. Once it picked up, it turned into a solid, albeit familiar Base Under Siege story, and it was just a rather fun adventure at that point. And although this serial wasn't as consistent as the Ice Warriors, I have to admit that I enjoyed it slightly more, and I'll probably find myself revisiting this one before I revisit the Ice Warriors, because it left me with a little bit of a stronger impression, even though it started off slightly weaker, whereas the Ice Warriors was a little bit the reverse. Overall, I found this story to be good fun. It was enjoyable and a welcome change of pace from the previous serial, which didn't do a lot for me. As a rather traditional but effective Base Under Siege story, I found myself having a good time in this one, although the first two parts took a bit to kick off. This was really quite an entertaining one, and I'm going to give The Seeds of Death a rating of 7.5 out of 10. And that is going to do it for this review of The Seeds of Death. If you have any thoughts on this one, be sure to leave them down below if you feel like it. And what I'm curious about is if people prefer the Ice Warriors or the Seeds of Death. And I do hope to see you around this upcoming Sunday for my review of the Space Pirates. I naturally have thoughts on this story. It is the last missing one of all time. It's the last missing story in Doctor Who. After this, all of them are completely available, which is really cool. So I do hope to see you around for that one, but if not, that's totally cool, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.